Hi guys, so today I wanted to take you through the full workflow of how I created this map right here. And so this map was designed for social media or a blog, something like that in mind. So it's pretty simple, it's got fairly low amounts of information on it, it has some highlights attached to it to kind of direct your eyes towards the thing that I'm most interested in you seeing. And so this is talking about the seismic risk in Japan. So this video is going to go through that entire workflow from the pulling of the data all the way to the design of the layout. So in this particular case, there was 3 sets of data that I used. So this one here is the earthquake list that is from the University of Tokyo. So it was compiled by Jessica Postrari. But if you actually look at this, the original data set is actually from the USGS. So this has fairly good metadata attached to it. It has what it is, so it's from 1960 to 2022. It took a look at the various different clusters in the database. So this is the one that I used in this particular case. Now, we will notice that the last item update was in 2022, so it may not have all of the data that is up until the most recent set, but even still, it's a fairly decent chunk of data that we have. And so in this case, we've got this URL that we can do, so we can copy that URL down at the bottom. And so then we can go over to our page here, and we can go over into our map, which is then where we can add data. Other ways that you can do this are you can right click on the map and add data that way, but in this case we're not going to do that for this one because we're going to be doing this from a path or from a URL. So I'm going to say I'm going to add data from path, and it's going to pop up with this URL. I'm just going to copy and paste this. It knows in this case, because it's fine, the URL is fine, that it is a USGS, it's an ArcGIS web server. And so I'm just going to add that data. So that's the first data that we're going to add, and we'll notice that it's this global data set. It has already been, it's got a rainbow style symbology attached to it, which don't worry, we'll be changing that. And so the next 2 sets of data that I'm going to use, because I'm only interested in Japan in this case, I'm going to head over into my other ones. Now, both of these are actually from Living Atlas, so they're Esri creations. And so you can see here that it's Esri curated content. So this is the municipal boundaries to provide a 2022 boundary count with the total population, and this one is the prefecture, same thing. And so all of this is from 2022, which is one of the reasons that I use this. So now in this case, because it is Living Atlas, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to right click on that map and go add data. Now when you pull up my data, you'll notice that under the portal content, you actually have Living Atlas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Living Atlas. Anything from Living Atlas I can actually find here to pull that URL. And so I'm going to start searching in here for Japan and population, and I'm going to see what comes up. So now we have a variety of different ones. All of them are from Living Atlas, and so 2 of them are from the DM, and 3 of them, are from the community maps. So this one and this one are the ones that I wanted. This one is just largely based on what the aggregation is, so I'm going to visualize this municipality one, but then I'm going to keep these prefecture boundaries just as a backdrop for it so that we can take a look at those underneath the earthquake. And that just is because there's going to be less lines, so it's going to be a little bit clearer, and because when people are looking at it, it looks more like how we would expect compared to those municipality boundaries. So that's going to add these ones in, and so we can right click on one of them and we can zoom to that layer so that we get this picture of Japan, make sure that it is what we want. And so if I check that off, we do have this layer of Japan here, and same thing there. So now I'm only interested in these Japan earthquakes, but we have this full global data set of them. So what I'm actually going to do is I am only going to be interested in the ones that happened in Japan. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut out anything that was also in the ocean nearby Japan and anything else. Now, you can adjust how you do this to also include some sort of radius around Japan if you wanted, but in my particular case, I'm only interested in the ones that happened on land or underneath land. And so to do that, I'm going to go over back into my maps, and I'm going to actually do a select by location. So I'm going to select by location. That's going to pop up this dialog box. Now there's two different ways you can select features. Within a layer, you can, or within any one of these, you can select by any of the things in their table, any of their attributes. Or if I'm between layers, if I'm working in vector data sets, then I can select based on how they're related. So I can select things in the earthquake layer that are inside of polygons that are nearby. And so that's what I'm going to do in this case. So I'm going to say that the thing I want out is going to be the earthquakes. So I want this earthquake list here, and I'm going to say that this is within any of the Japan prefectures. Now, the spatial relationship is from the perspective of the feature that you want out. So I could say, I could flip this and I could say which Japanese prefectures contain earthquakes, or which earthquakes are within Japanese prefectures. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to apply that, and you will notice that anything that is within any of these prefectures is selected. Anything that is not, anything that's in the ocean, is not selected. So these teal things are the selections that we want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to export that to its own data set. What's going on here? Okay, so I actually forgot when I was doing this that you can't actually access it direct from and work with it direct from ArcGIS. So I've just popped up Q. This is the open source program, and so we're going to get the data that we need from here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the exact same thing as before. So I'm going to add data here, and then I'm going to go over to the ArcGIS REST server. I'm going to create a new connection, which is going to pop up another one, and I'm going to say that these are Japanese earthquakes. And I'm going to pop that URL for the earthquakes into here. I'm going to hit OK for that, and then I'm going to connect it. Now, once you do that, you'll notice that this earthquake list pops up here. This is what we want, and we're going to add that one. And so it's going to pop it up in QGIS. So this works very similar to working with Arc. The things are sometimes in different locations because it's a different program, but ultimately they have the same types of functions attached to them. So once it finishes loading, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to export it from here and treat it as a local copy from when I pop it into Arc so that I can work with it. So one of the issues with this one was that I can't actually do anything with this, so everything's kind of grayed out. And so when it's grayed out, that means I can't work with it. I can only visualize it, and in this case, we need to do some things with it to make that export, or to make that export and then to visualize it the way we want to visualize it. And so that's why I'm getting it for this local copy. So this is just going to take a minute while it loads everything. So once we finish loading it, we right click on the earthquake list and go to data and go to export. And so we're going to export this as an Esri shapefile. We do want to make sure that it is in WGS 1984. The reason for this is pseudo Mercator, which is the default in QGIS, doesn't translate with Esri particularly well, and so it'll end up putting it off your map, and so that it's not in the correct location. It is one of the hangups attached to working with QGIS, is that many of the things or many of the errors that ArcGIS hides, QGIS does not hide. So I'm going to say that this is world earthquakes. And I say, yeah, that's fine. It's WGS 1984. I can take a look and make sure I want all of these things. I do in this case, so I'm just going to hit OK on that. And it's going to pop that up with a new one of all of the world earthquakes. So that's all I need from Q, so I'm just going to get rid of it and hit discard. Now, when I go back to my ArcGIS, I'm going to go to my local files where my downloads are. And I should have in here a shapefile that's called World Earthquakes. So this is the one I just downloaded off of there. And so I pop in the World Earthquakes, and I get rid of this earthquakes list. I'm going to remove that. And so then you'll see that you have the exact same earthquakes as before. They're just not visualized the same way. So I'm going to flip this out for World Earthquakes, still keep this, and then hit apply. Now we have those ones that we wanted, and we're gonna say okay. So we have all of these earthquakes now that were on Japan's soil, and so then here now I'm gonna right click on it, go to data, and export these features. And so now you'll notice that there are 325 earthquakes that are being exported here. And I'm going to say okay with that, and I'm just going to keep this in the geodatabase that I'm working with. This is largely because I'm going to be eventually creating an online map with it. This just keeps it all together. So I'm going to say that this is Japan earthquakes, and export that. We're going to get rid of this world earthquakes one, and now you'll see that we just have all of these Japanese earthquakes here. So perfect. This is what I wanted to work with. This is what I wanted to use. So now that I have these earthquakes here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing around with the symbology. Now, if we go back to the original one that I'm working with, I've got a bunch of different places here. It's going to look a little bit different when I design it this time around, but we're going to try and keep it kind of similar. So we've got all these different earthquakes here. And then we also had this municipality map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this prefecture one below the municipality map and turn it off for now, along with the Japan earthquake ones. And I'm just going to start working with this municipality one. Now, to work with this municipality one, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off all of the transparency attached to it. I'm also going to do that with this one. And the reason I'm turning off the transparency is because I want to work with transparency within the symbology that I'm dealing with. You can do the full layer, but what I've actually done in this map here to make it kind of blend out a little bit better and to really highlight where those purple ones are is I've used a color ramp, but then I've also used variable transparency, where as you go down in terms of the population, so as the lower the population gets, I've actually increased the transparency as well. So this has a dual effect of blending it into all of these, into the rest of the areas, so that it matches a little bit closer with this one over here. But this is also a way to kind of have multiple things happening at the same time, and to also use visual hierarchy to make those purple ones stand out so much more. And so that's what I'm going to do here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over into the symbology. It's going to pop it up on the right hand side here, and I'm going to go to graduated colors. Now I'm going to switch this over to population, the 2021 total population, and so you can see that you've got this as the prefectures. This is not the one I wanted. I wanted this as the municipality. So I'm going to switch that one back, head over to the municipalities, and do this one. So I'm going to say that this is a graduated color. I am 2021 population. There we go. So this one looks a little bit closer. Now in my case, I chose the purple one. It's a very nondescript color set. Yeah, it's fairly nice. It's fairly light. It's fairly good for population. It's not causing any alarm bells. So that's pretty nice. And so this is what the normal one comes up as. So the very first thing I do, because I'm working with very small areas, is the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of any of the borders. So to do that, I go to Format Symbols, I head over into the Properties, I turn the border transparent, and I turn it to 0. I no longer want borders. So there we go. So now we've got no borders. Now, I don't really like this white attached to it, but I don't really want to change that. So you can see behind that we've got this Japan Prefecture one back here. So I'm going to start messing around with that one. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to mess around with this one to make a fairly nondescript base map. The reason for this is because, again, I want that white layout. I don't want this world map here. I don't care about anything else going on in that, and because it's going into a format where I don't need the rest of the world, I'm just going to pretend the world doesn't exist and create the base map without it. So generally speaking, for my base maps, I usually do something to the effect of a grayscale, and I always turn my borders down to the lowest possible one. So the lowest possible border that you can see for a polygon or point is 0.4. And that's going to turn it into the smallest one. So you'll see that if I flip this to 0.3, generally speaking, it just makes it disappear. Oh, are we not going to do that? Have we fixed that? All right, apparently we can now do that again. Now we can do that. So, but generally speaking, I do it to 0.4. I never know what the latest updates of Esri do. So, we've now got the 0.4. It is, I didn't choose black because black is going to make that pop out, and I don't want to have it detracting from these municipalities when I eventually put it over. So I just did this in 2 different shades of gray. So I did this with the light gray and then the slightly less. And so now I go back to the municipalities and I turn this back on. Now I can keep it like this if I want. I can also add out more breaks if I want to. So it doesn't, in my case, I'm just going to keep it as natural breaks because I'm not really interested in the population. I'm interested in how the population relates to those earthquakes. But you can change where this is breaking if you want. You'll notice in my maps I don't have any legends because, again, I'm not really caring about what those things are. And so I've changed it to 6. That's going to be fine. I'm going to format all of these symbols and then switch this to 9, switch that to 0, apply that. Now we're good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to play with every single individual one of these so that I can have a gradient not only of color but of also transparency. Now when we started, you would have seen that original transparency attached to this was in and around 70%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over into the color properties and I'm going to flip this one to 70%. That was where that original transparency started. I'm going to apply that. And so now you have this kind of white that's going over top of it that's turning this a little bit lighter, but you can't really see it. And so then every one from there, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reduce that by 10 to 15% until we get to the bottom. And it is going to be, in this case, a bit of we'll see what we like. So that was 70%. We're going to say that this one's going to be 60%. We're going to apply that one. And you can see here that you can see it lightly. If you zoom into any of these areas, you can see that one now is showing up. But it's fairly light. It's not really detracting your attention from it, right? And so then we're going to go back. We're going to do this one. We're going to say that this one is, we had 60. I want this one to be, let's do a 15 on this one. Let's go 45 on this one. See if we like that. I don't mind that. And this one we're going to say is another 10. So we're going to say that this one is 35. There we go. And now for this one, we're going to say that this one, 35. We're going to say that this one is going to be another 15. And we're going to say that this one is 20. Now, as I said before, this isn't going to look the exact same as the one I did before, but it has kind of a similar sort of vibe if we pull these back up, right? So the color scheme's a little bit different. You can see a little bit of what I've changed in this case has been some of the transparency. So it doesn't look exactly the same, but it has a similar sort of vibe where you see this is the major part of it. And so what I'm actually going to do in this case is I am going to use this. I'm going to say that this is going to be its own map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to the snipping tool. You can create a layout if you want. I'm going to create my layout in Canva though. And so I'm just going to take this, I'm going to snip it, and I'm going to save it so that I can come back to it. So I'm going to go over to my pictures. I'm going to call this the Japan earthquakes, and I'm going to say that this was the population map. Okay, so that's that one. So now I'm going to turn this one off. I've already decided that that's what I'm going to do. So now we're working with this this earthquake map. And so with this earthquake map, we're going to go over, and in this case, I'm going to do a graduated symbol map. So I'm going to do graduated symbols. I don't want graduated colors. I want graduated symbols. So what it's done is it's already started to do FID by, started to grade it by the FID. I don't want that. I want this magnitude by, I want it to graduate it by its magnitude. And so you'll notice that we've got a couple of different things here, but there's a decent amount of them that are just putting themselves on top of each other. So the very first thing I'm actually going to do is head over into data exclusion. This is very similar to select by attributes. And so in the select by attributes in this case, you're going to be selecting out the thing you don't want to symbolize. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say where magnitude is less than, and I'm going to put this at 6. So I only want the major earthquakes, and so when I do this, you'll notice that all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of these that just disappear. And so when I then go and say I want to adjust this, all of a sudden you start seeing that there are very few of these. So I'm going to switch this. I'm going to say that there's going to be no color attached to it, nothing there. And so this only has a couple of these earthquakes left. And so maybe I want a few more of these. So maybe I'm going to go back and say, well, I want them greater than 5. I'm going to apply that. And we're going to see what we can do. And so then I'm going to switch this one into natural breaks. Okay, so with 5, we have a bunch more of them. So maybe that's what we want. Now again, they're all drawing on top of each other, so maybe I don't want this in this kind of yellow color. I definitely don't want it in the yellow color. And maybe also I kind of want them to be a little bit larger. So I want them to be a little bit larger, and I want these 5s to be a little bit larger. Okay, so now I'm thinking that might be a little too big. You want them to vary, but you know, you don't necessarily want a whole bunch of pins. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch this entire transparency here so that I can start working with it, because I'm not going to have individual transparency for each of these. You can, but with points it can get a little weird or a little bit dicey, particularly if you're varying size and transparency. So if I do this to 70, this is not going to work. This is too much. But if I do something like 40%, this kind of grays it out a little bit so that you have the map underneath it, but you can start seeing some of the points that are underneath. And so then I'm going to go and I'm going to adjust this template. And so you can play around with the color of it. I just chose kind of this brown one, and I removed any of the, I don't know that I did actually do that. I think I did a little bit more than that. There we go. Okay, so what I've done in this case is I've just made a very light border on top of it, so you can see it a little bit where they're drawing over top of each other. So some parts are going to be a little bit lighter, some parts are going to be a little darker, but you can kind of see that there's something going on. I'm going to drop that just a little bit more so it's a little bit darker. And so now I've got all of these ones here. Now in this case, with this particular data set, there's not a ton of them. Some of the updated ones have a little bit more, and so you can see that on the one that I did here. There's an update attached to it, so it has more across the rest of it, but even still, this one works not too bad. You still have a good chunk of Tokyo, you have a bunch in the south, you have some in Hokkaido, and so now what I do is I do that exact same thing. So I go through and I say, yeah, this is what I want. I'm going to cut out this map. I'm going to save this as my earthquake map. And so that was how we got from the first to last. So basically all we did was a spatial selection out of this and then change the symbology. The rather slightly unique thing that we did in this case was looking at how we can adjust transparency and the gradient for the population map. So when I come back, I'm going to walk you through how I created things in Canva, and